Painting white subjects in watercolour is a challenge. That's the nicest way of putting it, because we've got transparent paint and we've got white paper. So how do you capture white subjects? Well, I've got 5 top tips that I want to share with you that will help you, because though it's a challenge, it's not impossible. And that's whether you're painting a white rose, a white magnolia flower, a westy dog, or a white peacock like the one over my shoulder. So I'm going to share those tips, and then I'm going to show how I put them into practice in that Pekin duck. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a professional watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I bring you a tip, trick or technique that I wish someone had told me about when I started painting. And this week it's those 5 top tips for capturing white subjects in watercolour. So this is the Peking duck that I'm working from, and it's from Pixabay, and I'll put the URL in the comments, so if you want to use it you'll be able to find that. And my first tip is to ask yourself, how white is this subject? Now you'd look at that and think, oh, it's a white duck, but actually, is it white, or is it yellowy white, bluey white, pinky white, purpley white, greeny white? And that can be hard to identify, but if you cut just a little square or a little hole in a piece of really white paper and put it over different areas, it'll help you identify. So that's pretty white. But of course, if I come down here, that's actually, well, it's very grey, but it's a very yellowy grey. If I go over here, we can immediately see it's bluey white. If I come down here, it's actually greeny grey. So if you're struggling to see what sort of white you've got, a piece of paper like that really helps. And why is it orangey grey? Well, it's grey because there's shadow, but why is it orangey? It's because there's reflected colour from its feet. Why is this green down here? Reflected colour from the grass. There's probably orangey white up here, reflected colour from the beak. Check out whether you've got cool whites or warm whites, would be my first tip. Then you need to identify which areas are really white, and say this tail is very white, this is very white, top of the head's very white, and you need to retain that in your painting. Paint round it, leave the white of the paper, that is your brightest area. You need to plan your composition strategically. So if you want that to be whitest white, or the tail to be whitest white, we read everything by contrast, so you will need dark colours behind it, and you need to plan your composition. So if you're doing a white flower, the easiest way of making that flower really pop forward and look properly white is to put dark leaves behind it. Then when you're painting, you need to keep your water clean, because any contamination is going to really show up in the pale colours you'll be using. And then my 5th tip is about painting shadows. So when you're painting a white subject, actually you're not painting the white, that is your paper, you are painting the shadows. So you need to add those tints and colours that you've identified, and you need to do what we call negative painting. So by painting round the subject, you actually find the subject. So it's only by the fact that I painted round the tail is that we get that tail feather showing there, or by painting round this lovely sort of fat bit of its rump, we've got that showing forward. So the use of negative painting and coloured shadows is my 5th tip. So I've planned my colours here, and you can see them along the bottom. It's always worth just swatching them out so that you can make sure that they all play nicely with each other on the paper. And the paper I'm using is £140 knot surface watercolour paper. Start with the eyes in case they go wrong, and then I can just turn over and start again. I have sketched this out just using pencil, and I'm using a dark purple just to put the dark eyes in. And then from there I'm going to start working on the shadows around the cheeks with a bit of that colour and some clean water to pull it away to create very soft blended shadows. I've started with a purple, but you'll see in a moment I'm going to just touch in some of the blues and later on the oranges, just to get really interesting variations to give form to those lovely chubby cheeks. If you touch the colours in wet, everything will stay soft and you'll get nice feathery edges, which of course is just perfect for our feathery subject. So we're going to be really aware of what's damp, what's wet, what's dry, so that I can control those edges and make sure that things are soft where I want them and hard where I want them. And again, I'm just using lots of clean water and controlling the amount of water on the surface by using kitchen towel and also a thirsty brush. So that's a clean brush that's damp, so it sucks up any excess water that I don't want. And here you can see I'm just dropping in a tiny bit of cobalt blue, and the idea is just to create more and more interest. When those cheeks are dryish, I can work on the beak, and I don't mind if some of that colour from the beak does go into the cheek or indeed the neck area, because we saw at the beginning there is some reflected colour there, but I don't want it all to sort of mush, because of course the beak is quite hard edged. And I'm putting down yellow as a base colour and then dropping the oranges in, and I'm keeping a couple of hard edges to show the form of the beak, and particularly around the nostrils, because you've sort of got a little bit of a ridge round there. And then we put in that little end sort of notch and start to develop those sorts of colours, and that's the pyrrole orange, and then dropping in shadows of purple. The nostrils actually bleed out because the beak was still wet, but that doesn't matter, it'll fade, and then we'll sharpen that up later. And I've just worked down the neck and the body in much the same way. I've gone on to a larger brush and I'm keeping all my tones nice and light, and then just dabbing in little bits of colour so that they can all blend and keep soft. I did actually sprinkle some salt in there, but it didn't really do anything, so let's not worry about that. And I'm working around that lovely leg and thigh, and then I'm going to come down into the feet in a moment, which of course will be loads of fun. And into the feet, again, I'm leaving little white highlights to show the scales on the legs, and just get a bit of contrast really with the webbing between the toes. So I'm using a whole mixtures of oranges and yellows and blending it out. It looks a bit hard at the moment, but don't forget your watercolour is going to dry lighter as it dries. So what, about 15% even? So you just need to be a bit bold with some of the colours. Putting in that reflected colour under the belly, there is definitely a lot of orange reflected from these lovely legs, and just putting that funny toe bit that's off the back of their legs there, so that's good. The second leg and webbing is done in exactly the same way, just blending, leaving little highlights, softening, dropping in purple to add the shadows, all the things we've been doing in the other parts of the body, with a few more hard marks, because of course the legs and the feet are a lot harder than the soft yummy belly of that little duck. And while it's damp, we can put that purple in just to add little sort of shadows and let it blend and get interesting mixes. And it's so much nicer to let things mix wet on the paper. Well, there's my duck, but we now need to add in background washes to define the edges, and that's a very simple process. You can either wet the surface round and then drop the colours in, or as I'm doing here, put a little bit of colour and then sort of pull it away, and you can see I'm defining the top of that head. So you can have a lot of fun with that, and you can darken things down if you need to get more contrast in particular areas. And the more contrast you get, the lighter the things will look. So that tail looks very light against the purple. So with this layer nice and dry, I can rub out any pencil lines so they don't show through. And then really it's a second layer, which is a very similar process, but just strengthening and deepening the colours in places, adding a little more shadow, adding a little more contrast as we wish. The secret is always to blend and make sure that you don't get hard areas where you don't want them, and to stop too soon rather than too late. If you need to lift, you can use a short flat brush just to loosen the pigment, loose edges, or just soften things if they have got a bit hard. So don't worry, even though watercolour has that reputation of being a bit unforgiving, there's usually something you can do to amend what's on the paper. Let's say soften a hard edge if it's turned out to be that way, or add extra colour to really sort of deepen what's going on and to amend colours, because of course it's transparent. And then I'm working on the background just to oomph up the contrast in places. And again, I'm starting to get to the point when I really say to myself, is this enough? Should I stop? Because going too far is a lot worse than stopping too soon. You can always add more tomorrow, but you can't take it away as easily. And here's the final one. You can see all those top tips in action. So don't be frightened of painting white subjects, and have fun.